I can start seeing the amount of space I have to work with. I've removed the inverter, solar charge controller, and the relay that turned the battery power on and off to the inverter. And I've also lifted the electrical panel out of the way. Now that I have the negative stud in and the positive battery cutoff switch, I was able to put the inverter down low and find a spot for it, leaving just enough room for this board to hit the ground. So I'm going to cut out all of this part right here. That's enough to clear this front edge for the cabinet. So that's about perfect. So then the trick is, can I get this top up? So I made that just a little bit bigger than it needed to be. I had to replace the fuse from the last inverter, which was 150 amp. The Victron MultiPlus requires a 400 amp fuse. So to keep it as tight as possible, I went from the on-off switch by copper bars, so these are 1/8 inch. I did 2 of them, and I bent them slightly so that the fuse holder would be flush against the wall. Using some bolts, I put some backers on the other side to hold the, what are they called? They're like a nut retainer. The next item I need to figure out is an isolator switch for the photovoltaic panels. The existing system didn't have that. All you could do was disconnect the wires. So I'm looking at this cabinet that's just next to the refrigerator and trying to figure out all of this extra space I can use. You can see that there were, it was boxed in, leaving room for the grounds, and at the very bottom, the photovoltaic wires that were coming in. So I kind of thought I could just reuse this space. So this is just a dummy panel right there. But if I take off the back panel and take off the bottom panel, that gives me, you know, another couple of inches of space on the ground and another 5 or 6 inches of space on the back. So I need to figure out how I'm going to mock in a cover for that. But looking at it, there's room back here that I can put that large switch, and it is large. I think what I'm going to do is just cut the panel across here and then come up with a way to mount this switch on that wall with it reset behind a box. And be able to squeeze this flush with this wall. Figured out how to mount the solar disconnect. I removed one board, added a couple cleats so I could add a larger board back in here with a hole for the knob to turn the power on and off. On the solar switch, I added, using screws on the inside to stay away from any wires, but I added a couple brackets. So, and I have wired the solar disconnect, so I'll add the face frame to that, and then that ends up getting bolted to the back of this panel, and the panel gets screwed into the wall. I have 2 sets of wires. One's from the solar panels on the roof, and the other is a XT60 connector on the side of the van for a ground array. Okay, so all right, I'll put a label on it, but left is off, up and down is on. I've completed the wiring so that I can install the inverter. To explain what's going on, there's a positive going to the battery, coming up to an on-off switch, And then there's a copper bar going from here to a 400 amp fuse that goes to the inverter. So that wire is off right now so we can see what's going on. At the battery disconnect, there's also a cable that goes to 50 amp fuse, and this 50 amp fuse goes to the DC distribution panel. I've also used this junction to connect both of the solar charge controllers. They're on 30 amp fuses. So I have a 100 volt 20 amp MPPT solar charge controller for the roof panels, and then I added a 100 volt 30 amp MPPT controller that goes to an external XT60 connector for ground array. I have the chassis ground connected, and I'm just getting the positive and negative that go to the battery terminal just in the case. I built a little bracket since the one I was missing from the original, so it just slides in. Then I'll connect positive and negative cables here in a second once it's all the way in. All right. Now time to connect the positive and negative cables. With the work mostly done in the inverter cabinet, it's time to install the GX Touch 50 display. I'm putting it on the panel that goes above the door next to the Trima control and in the place of the old reset switches for the lithium batteries. One's already pulled out, and then this is my one good battery, which is an L battery. To power the GX Touch 50, you need a 5 volt. So I'm taking it off of the Trima power, going through a switch, that was the inverter switch, to a buck converter and onto a USB. So I also need to add an HDMI extension cable, and that run will go down behind the cabinet, behind the microwave, and down the wall, and then to the Cerbo GX. I just need to remove the microwave. That's a couple screws that come out, I believe 4mm alum. So microwave's coming out next. I know there's a stopper in the top middle that holds it in, so I say just scoot it forward to get past that stopper. There it goes. I should be able to run that HDMI cable from that side and then straight down. I'm going to clean this cabinet up as well as the top of the microwave. I used a 10-foot HDMI extension. It was just long enough. I taped off the connectors so they don't come loose. This is USB, the HDMI. Routed it behind the upper cabinet to the microwave cabinet. Then I was able to push it down and then find it here above the fridge all the way in the back, and then I was able to run it down a rib to get it to come out down here at the inverter. All right, I removed the battery box from under the van, so I'm going to show you how to take it apart so I can put the Epoch battery in there. Four cells, all the BMS area. Looks pretty clean. This one's got a bus bar where the other one had a wire. I'm going to remove each of the wires for the battery so I can take the cells out individually. And then I'll take off these near bolts here, and that'll allow the BMS to slip down and under and out. So I'm removing the little bar that holds the battery cells, keeps them from sliding around. All right, with the 12 volt 20 watt heated cell out of the way, should be able to take each of these cells out individually now. Second heating blanket. With those two top nuts out, this whole assembly will slide backwards, up and out. All right, I'm gonna grind off the 4 nut heads that were in place to hold the battery. Opposite the side of the vent hole, I'm gonna put 2 starter holes at 3 3/4 and 6 3/4. And since it's an 1.5 inch hole saw, I'll start the hole at 3 and end at 7.5. With the 2.5 inch holes cut out, I went ahead and drew lines so I can follow them with the grinder. So cutting next with the grinder. Put a clean out wheel on it, get all the burrs off. I want to show how I finished up this box. So I have the port that I took out. It's got plenty of silicone to seal that up. No way that's going to leak. Next is to add some silicone to this top plate. Already cut it out. And you can see it's going to be a pretty good fit. This one's just going to be a press fit. Got a board to put on this side to keep the battery from moving each way. So I'm just going to put some silicone on that, keep it in place. And we'll use the battery as a wedge to put it in, but you can kind of see where it's going to go. Get it all the way against that wall and press it in. And now I'm going to get the battery and put the battery in. So let's see. I have both batteries installed in the cases, so just have some foam rubber to pad it. So put that in and then put the top on. Got it marked positive and negative so I don't get confused as to which of the 3 I'm using. I'm not using this one here, but I'm using the other 2. I didn't show the process of removing the 2 batteries from under the van. It's pretty straightforward. Recommendation is to use the motorcycle lift to take the load, and you just have some bolts and nuts to remove and they'll lower. I do want to show one change I made, which was to add a 3-foot long negative to the front battery. So I go from this front battery to a shunt, and then from the shunt I go to ground. I decided a picture would show the change better. The original setup is at left, and both the load and ground went to the back battery. The preferred configuration appears to be load into one battery and the ground out of the other. But right now, so I go from the positive of the back battery to load, and I'm also tapping off this point to power the shunt. And then from the shunt I take a VE direct cable and I go under the van and I go up in through a new 3/4 inch conduit that I've put silicone around to keep from leaking. So that's it. New shunt, new batteries installed and wired correctly. I'm starting to reassemble the cabinets. This front cabinet was smaller. It had a back wall where this board was. I took it out so I could add that solar disconnect. I put some Dynamat over the wheel well, so I have about probably 50% more space, if not more than that. I now have the Cerbo GX installed. The MultiPlus has about 1.25 inch gap between the fascia board and the side. That's because I pushed this inverter into the back cabinet. I cut out that back panel so that it would fit. I didn't need to do that. There's an inch, like I said, there's 1.25 inch space, but I wanted the extra cooling from the wheel well area. So I did want to open that cabinet up. The solar charge controller for the existing solar panels, I have a disconnect, a fuse to the inverter, solar fuses, as well as going into this upper cabinet, which is the only thing I did outside of the existing space. I added an extra solar charge controller for an outside array that wasn't there before. I also covered the top of this because every now and then I would lose something back there and have to take the drawer out and dig down and find it. So I just cut a small piece of plywood and put in there. So next I need to put on the top panel and then the hinge lid. Victron and Epoch battery installation is complete. It's time to check it out. One of the things I really like is the monitor. So I can see what's going on, and most importantly, you have a state of charge. As an example of the type of detail you get, I've got two solar charge controllers. The one that's on the roof panels, it shows I'm getting something, and then I have no ground array plugged in, but that's the type of detail you can get off of this. Very informative in a system. I got the cabinets all the way back in. I did a mod on this inverter cabinet and added two fans, one to suck air out and one to blow in, and that one's aligned with the inverter fan. And the way this system works is the Victron has powered relays and you can program them. So I'm going to walk you through how I program the relay that says turn the fans on when the inverter fan comes on and turn them off when the inverter fan goes off. To power the 12-volt computer fans, we're going to run the positive cable into the common part of the K1 relay and out the normally open circuit. Then we're going to go into the VE Configure 3 software, and we're going to program an assistant. We add assistant, and then we look for the relay and programmable relay, and we program that assistant by clicking Start Assistant, selecting the K1, set relay on based on the MultiPlus fan. So when the fan is on for 10 seconds, the relay will open. Now we have to turn the fans off. So we're going to add an assistant for that. Again, programmable relay. Select K1. Again, the MultiPlus fan. So when the fan is off for 30 seconds, the relay is going to close and take the power away from the computer fans. That's it.